I graduated high school almost a year ago. I had really no urge to attend college or the military, and basically got stuck in my boring hometown for months, where I slowly became dependent on Xanax and booze, and was destined to repeat the cycle of white trash set before me by my parents, and theirs before me. I knew I had to leave town, so I decided to sign up for a website you may have heard of called Worldwide Opportunities in Organic Farming. You pay a small fee, and they make available a directory of organic farming operations that will feed you and allow you to live with them in return for a certain amount of work around the farm. The place I decided to commit to was a Hare Krishna community in the deep south. I got there, and my car almost immediately broke down. It was a 30-year-old Chevy Blazer I bought on Craigslist for $500. Later on, I was to find out it was beyond repair at this point. The closest town was almost 20 miles away, so I found myself stranded and surrounded by the most unbearable hipsters. To be more specific, I'd say about a third of the population of the community were either first or second generation Indian immigrants living near the temple for religious reasons. Another demographic were aging hippies, also there for spiritual purposes, but also running the small-scale organic farm located on the property. Everyone else, however, self-absorbed, condescending, right out of college, but vapid as shit hipsters. I basically kept to myself, but occasionally was forced into conversations about vibrating crystals and their 3-year spiritual journey, no doubt being funded by their parents. I had been there for weeks and was desperate for a real conversation, and then Michael showed up. I had heard stories about Michael. A couple of days before I showed up, he had left to retrieve an impounded car in a large city about an hour away. Everyone said he was lazy, insane, and would spend hours up in his room doing yoga instead of coming down and working with the rest of us. He showed up late in the evening going on about how he was going to really get involved with the farming and throw himself into Krishna consciousness. He was in his early 30s. He looked like a balding Hasidic Jew, his unwashed sideburns curled. He spoke like a stoner cartoon character. His sentences punctuated with and like, giving his utterly fried brain time to figure out what others wanted to hear. He reminded me of many of the friends I left back home. We became fast friends, as he was the only person there who didn't give me the urge to bite my fingers off when he spoke. We were both from Texas, so we talked about the loony conservative teachers we had in high school, football, and of course drugs. Every now and then he brought up subjects that really sort of threw me off. He wasn't able to get his car out of the impound garage, so he schemed the best way to break it out. These plans involved firearms, pipe bombs, and telepathy. He told me he came to the Hare Krishna temple to befriend some of the gurus and learn Reiki meditation, a form of meditation used to control the minds and bodies of other people. He told me he believed he had used Reiki once to seduce a woman at a party. This is when I understood his reputation. I simply nodded and laughed occasionally when he went off on these rants. I knew one day I would reach a saturation point for this absurdity, but I could probably endure a week more. A couple of days later, we were eating lunch with one of the gurus. I was telling Michael about my trip to the giant field where the Branch Davidian used to be. He wasn't sure what the Branch Davidian was, so I explained to him about Waco, David Koresh, and the botched siege by the FBI and ATF that led to the death of 76 Davidians and 4 ATF agents. He was enraged. The government is always trying to silence people preaching the truth. That's so fucked up. I wanted to explain to him that David Koresh was a sociopathic cult leader, interested in power and nothing else, but he wasn't having it. Now I was angry. He was having a tantrum about a subject I had just explained to him. And now he's telling me I'm wrong and that Koresh was a martyr. This is when I saw the truly insane Michael. He was spitting, red as a beet, pacing back and forth. I left the table and got back to work, but he followed me. After half an hour of this absurd argument, I couldn't handle it anymore. I'm not having this conversation with a fucking loon, Michael. How can I expect logic from you? You came here to get superpowers. The look in his eyes changed from anger to hatred. He got real still and went at me. Michael was a big guy, much, much bigger than me. He lunged at me, and I ran. As I ran, I went through my pocket, praying I had grabbed my knife before I left my cabin. I know it sounds ridiculous, but you don't walk my old neighborhood without some sort of protection. Plus, it was a pretty useful tool on the farm. Luckily, I had grabbed it and turned around so he saw it. He stopped and contemplated for 3 seconds. He quickly turned around and finished his lunch. The next day, I pulled the temple president aside and explained what happened, and that we had to get rid of him. It didn't take much convincing. No one really cared for him, and he wasn't much help on the farm. I felt bad snitching on the guy. He was in a pretty desperate situation. He had no car, no money, and I can't imagine he had many friends. The temple president also informed me that he had been an alcoholic for 10 years and had come here to get sober. I found it very strange he never told me this. Later that day, I saw through my window someone drive up and hand him several suitcases to pack what little he had, and I saw them both drive off to God knows where. Weeks went by, and the whole encounter kind of faded from my conscience. Late one night, I got a text. "Hey, this is Michael. We can get my car out for $280. Want to go traveling?" I never responded. I wasn't sure how he got my number, but I figured he looked me up on Facebook or something. A few nights later, I was in the temple office using the Wi-Fi to make some emails. I was making the walk back to my cabin, and from the pitch black, I hear a lot of loud banging coming from a barn. I remember thinking it must be an animal, but also thinking it must be a pretty big one to make that much noise. I entered my cabin. The actual door to the cabin doesn't have a lock, but my bedroom did, so I used that one. I was pretty unsettled by the banging, but I figured my imagination was getting the best of me. Later that night, I woke up needing to take a piss. The cabin didn't have a bathroom, but we had a shared outhouse. I didn't feel like putting on shoes and walking around in the dark, so I figured I'd just piss in the sink. I know it's gross, but I'm the only one who uses that kitchen. I opened my bedroom door and nearly pissed myself right there. Michael, completely naked, was crouching in a corner of my kitchen, facing the wall. I made a noise I wasn't aware I could make, something you would only hear Shaggy make on Scooby-Doo. This noise alerted Michael to my entrance. All he did was glare at me and shook his whole body. I slammed my door and locked it almost immediately. I knew what he was trying to do. He was trying to pacify me with Reiki meditation. I called 911. I didn't open my door or even approach it until I saw the red and blue lights outside my window. Michael wasn't there when they arrived. My guess is he ran deep into the woods that surrounded the farm. I explained me and Michael's history and what had happened that night. There wasn't much they could do since no one seemed to know anything about Michael. I didn't even know his last name. I had to leave the farm shortly after. Calling the police was really frowned upon, since I believe many of the old hippies thought they were still avoiding the draft. I didn't mind leaving either. I couldn't sleep knowing Michael might be out in those woods, angrier than he was before. I stayed up almost 3 days while I waited for my friend to come pick me. My girlfriend and I have been living together for years, and about 2 years ago, we decided to move to a new rental house. The house is in a nice, quiet suburb, on a dead-end street with a huge property, 200 acres, of farmland at the end of the street. We had met almost all of the locals and gotten along with them like a house on fire. About 3 months after moving in, my girlfriend decided, it's time to make a long-term commitment and huge decision without consulting my partner, and adopted us a 9-month-old dog. This dog was completely untrained. Luckily, we had a big backyard, and most of the neighbors had dogs, so they understood that the training process was a tough one. Aside from a few of my girlfriend's underwear going missing, which we assumed was the dog, things are great. Anyway, back to the story. I work early mornings. I come home from work one day, a week after adopting her, to find our new, untrained dog had escaped our yard and gone walkabouts. I call my girlfriend and tell her what happened. She says she'll be home soon. Meanwhile, I decide to continue walking around and ask the locals if they have seen her, which, to my pleasure, they have. Unfortunately for us, the last they saw of her, she was heading towards the huge farmland at the end of the street. I head down to the end of the road to see if I can find her, but there's a giant fence in the way, and a trespassers will be shot sign out front. Naturally, I fear the worst and decide not to enter. This is when my girlfriend gets home and meets me at the end of the road. She found out who owns the property and managed to get his number from another neighbor. She calls him, and he tells us to meet him out front of his house, which is right next to the property. This place looks completely unkempt. The fence is rusty and broken. The bushes are overgrown and taking over. Despite logic, we went inside to wait for him there. Before we can reach the door, I look in the window and see something really weird. Mannequins. Mannequins everywhere. All wearing lingerie and covered in some red shit. I assume paint, but you never know. We share a glance at each other, and then he shows up out of nowhere. This middle-aged, sunburnt, full-on Aussie farmer shouts at us that he's seen that dog, and to follow him, and he'll show us where it is. I didn't really want to follow, but based on the stories some neighbors had told us, he's completely willing and has on more than one occasion shot and nearly killed other people's dogs. So we follow. It's at this stage he starts small talk with my girlfriend, asking how old she was, how long we had been at the house, all questions about her. The questions start to get quite personal when luckily our dog shows up. We grab her, say thanks, and then pretty much gap it out of there. After that, we decided to fix up our fences, buy a dryer to put inside, and avoid that end of the road altogether. A few days later, I get up at 2:30 a.m., proceed to get ready for work, hop in my car, pull out of the carport, and notice a white UT idling on the road outside our house. Wouldn't usually be an issue for me, but this is a quiet road, and I know after 4 months there, no one is up at this time. I turn on my high beams only to find out it's that same farmer from the property. He immediately drives off. I call my work and tell them I won't be in. I'm not going to leave my girlfriend at home alone after that. Park my car out front and stay up all night to make sure he doesn't come back. The same thing happens the next 2 mornings. Same UT. Same time, but same shit. He drives off as soon as I hop in my car and turn the lights on. After that, for a couple of days, nothing happens. Until Monday morning, I get up for work and he's back. At this stage, I've had enough of this shit. I lock up the house, hop in my car, and high beam the shit out of him. He drives off. I dial the police and follow him just long enough to get his license plate number before he loses me doing 80 down our long, bumpy road. I pass all his details on to the police, license plate, car description, and address, and they tell me to go home, stay there, and they will send someone over immediately. I go inside and wake up my girlfriend, tell her what happened, and that some officers will be here soon. 10 minutes later, 4 squad cars show up at our house. 2 go down the road and park outside his house. 1 officer comes in to question us further and make sure we're okay. They both stay until the sun comes up. 1 leaves, and the other stays parked out front. Later that day, we get told that they caught the guy doing 120 down the highway, searched his car, and found 2 knives, 1 pistol, and 1 rifle in the cabin, along with photos of my girlfriend and a pair of her underwear. Needless to say, we were freaked the fuck out and filed a restraining order for when he does get out of jail. In hindsight, I wasn't very smart in the situation. Should have called the cops a lot earlier on, but this shit has never happened. So I kinda didn't think either of our lives were at risk. Big fucking mistake. Back in 2015, I had the choice of getting a dog or getting a smartphone. I'd never had a dog in my life, or a decent phone, come to think of it. And I'd been saving up for a phone anyhow, so naturally, I picked the dog. My dad knew a fella who had a couple of border collies that had recently had a litter. So, we drove out, and the dude gave me the last pup. Enter Bailey. A couple of weeks after he got his shots, I started walking him. My parents figured I was going to be hanging out at the local park with my new pup, so I could get him socialized. But no. I chose to take him around the perimeter of a nearby farm to keep the farm dog in him. I'd been sneaking out to this farm for years. The farmer was an old family friend. My uncles had grown up working for him, so I knew if I was ever caught, I could just drop their name. On either side of the farm, there was some thick woodland, which no one had ever given me reason to be wary of. They probably should have. So, it's a sunny afternoon. It had been pouring down all week, and Bailey was itching for a good walk. I take him to the farm at our usual time, and we start making our way around to the woods on the east side of the farm. Everything is quiet, but Bailey keeps darting away from me to explore. He's a puppy. It's what they do, but of course, I'd been calling his name all the way around the field. We're about halfway past the woods. I could see the roof of the farmhouse over the next hill. Bailey's been pulling crap out of the bushes all the way along, and I'd just given him into trouble for rolling in a pile of fox crap. That's when I hear a man's voice calling my dog by his name. Like this dude I didn't even know was calling my dog by name. I knew it wasn't the farmer because I'd met him at family events like barbecues and weddings, so I knew what his voice sounded like. I go completely silent, but the guy keeps calling on my dog. It sounds like he's deep into the woods and maybe moving. He's calling my dog with an excited tone in his voice, which is what creeps me out the most. Bailey, meanwhile, is completely ignoring this guy and sniffing the now flat pile of poop. I'm like a tiny 18-year-old girl. The most combat experience I have is a month learning Taekwondo when I was 11, and I don't have a mobile phone. If that guy works out where I am, I'm screwed. And if Bailey decides to go in after him, I'm double screwed, because I am not letting a possible psycho get his hands on my puppy. I can either run to the farm, which isn't too far away, or run back through the field towards home. I pick up my dog and sprint across the field. Behind me, I hear someone emerge from the woods, but I'm already over the fence and sprinting back home with my puppy tucked under my arm. I get home and tell my mom. She brushes it off as some weird drunk guy. A few weeks later, I'm at my uncle's house, and the farmer walks in. I'd told my uncle what happened, so he brings it up. The farmer asks exactly which woods I'd been close to, and that some of his clothes had gone missing from his washing line. He'd put it down to strong winds, but now he's not sure. I take him and my uncle to the exact spot the next day, and all three of us go in and find a completely wrecked campsite. There's no clothes or anything, but the tent has collapsed in on itself. There's no fire, but there are some empty gas canisters like you'd use for a portable stove and empty packets of food scattered everywhere. We report it to the police, but nothing ever really comes of it, except that I got a phone not long after and keep it on me whenever I go out. This happened a long time ago, and thinking about it still creeps me out. I live in Adair County, Kentucky, on a horse farm, and one day in the summer around 5 years ago, my mother, who's the horse enthusiast in our family, found a horse she wanted for sale in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. We'll call the seller of this horse James. For those who don't know, Lawrenceburg is one of several places that have claimed to see Kentucky's version of Bigfoot, the hillbilly beast, which has been spotted all over the state. My little brother and I, being suckers for those things like most kids, went with her hoping to see it. Fast forward, James's house was far from town and on a one-way dirt road miles from anywhere. Only a few houses were dotted here and there on the side of the road, but this one I will seriously never forget. We were about 5 minutes away from the person's house we were getting the horse from, and going slow because he had a trailer hooked to the back of our 4Runner. I'm staring out the window, hoping to see the hillbilly beast somewhere in the woods along the side of the road, when I saw this house. This house had well over 20 mannequins throughout their yard, all shapes and sizes. Most were laying down or propped against what looked like a shed. But there were two that really freaked me out. One was an adult female, tied to a tree right next to the road, so close I could probably touch it if I rolled down the window and stuck my hand out. The second was the size of a baby. This one was nailed to a tree only a couple of yards away. Both of them looked really old and worn out, moldy, rotting, etc. My mom stopped the car, and we were all just sitting there staring at this place. The house was old and run down, but obviously being lived in, but the shed next to it looked almost brand new, minus what looked like satanic graffiti written all over it. Being freaked out, we drove away. Fast forward again. Once we got to James, we asked him about the freaky mannequin place, and he said he never saw anything like it. He also said he was in town just that morning and took that exact road, so it's likely he should have seen it. Once we left with the horse, we took a different way home, so we didn't see this mannequin house again. Part of me says this could have been just some freaky prank. The other part of me is wondering, what if they weren't mannequins?